The Genius of Sophocles by Richard Claverhouse Jebb. The most brilliantly joyous of all comedies were brought about in a city vexed during the years that gave them birth by every kind of misery in turn, by wanton pestilence, by faction and the mutual distrust of citizens, by defeat on land and sea, by the sense of abasement and the presage of ruin. During more than 20 years of war, Aristophanes was the best public teacher of Athens, but there were times when distraction was more needed than advice. One of his best plays belongs to the number of those which we meant simply to amuse the town, at a time when it would have been useless to lash it. The comedy of the Frogs came out in a season of gloomy suspense just after Athens had made a last effort in equipping a fleet and was waiting for decisive news from the seat of war in January 405 BC, 8 months before Aegospotami, and about 15 months before the taking of Athens by Lysander. A succession of disasters and seditions had worn out the political life of the city. Patriotic satire could no longer find scope in public affairs, for there were no longer any vital forces which it could either stimulate or combat, nor could the jaded minds of men such a time easily rise into a region of pure fancy, as when 9 years before, on the eve of the last crisis in the war, Aristophanes had helped them to forget the scandals of impiety and misgovernment on a voyage to his city in the clouds. What remained was to seek comfort or amusement in the past. And since the political past could give neither, then in the literary past, in the glories, fading now like other glories of art and poetry. It was now just 50 years since the death of Aeschylus. It was only a few months since the news had come from Macedonia of the death of Euripides. More lately still, at the end of the year before, Sophocles had closed a life blessed from its beginning by the gods, and now happy in its limit. For, as in his boyhood he had led the paean after Salamis, so he died too soon to hear the dirge of imperial Athens. The cry, raised in the Piraeus, and caught up from point to point through the line of the long walls which carried up from the harbour to the town the news of the overthrow on the Hellespont. With the death of Euripides and the death of Sophocles so recent, and no man living who seemed to be able to replace them, it might well seem to an Athenian that the series of the tragic masters was closed. In the Frogs, Aristophanes supposes Dionysus, the god of dramatic inspiration, going down to the shades to bring back to Athens beggared poets, and unable to live without them, the best poet that could be found below. It is hard to imagine anything more pathetic than an Athenian audience listening at just that time to that comedy in the theatre of Dionysus. In view of the sea over which their empire was even then on its last trial, surrounded by the monuments of an empire over art which had already declined, in the building, at once theatre and temple, which the imagination of the poets lately dead had long peopled with the divine or heroic shapes known to them and their fathers, but in which they might well forebode the living inspiration of the god would never be shown forth again. The interest of the comedy does not depend, however, merely on its character of epilogue to a school of tragic drama so masterly, of so short an actual life, of so perpetual an influence. It takes another kind of interest from the justness of its implicit criticism, the criticism of a man whose wit would not have borne the test of the centuries and the harder test of translation if he had not joined to a quick fancy the qualities which make a first-rate critic. When Dionysus reaches the lower world, an uproar is being raised among the dead. It has been the custom that the throne of tragedy, next to Pluto's own, shall be held by a laureate for the time being, subject to removal on the coming of a better. For some time Aeschylus has held the place of honour. Euripides, however, has just come down. The newer graces of his style, which he lost no time in showing off, have taken the crowd, and their applause has moved him to claim the tragic throne. Aeschylus refuses to yield. As the only way of settling the dispute, scales are brought. The weightiest things which the rivals can offer are compared, and at last the balance inclines for Aeschylus. But where in the meantime is Sophocles? He too is in the world of the dead, having come down just after Euripides. Did he, asked Xanthias, the slave of Dionysus, lay no claim to the chair? No, indeed, not he, answers Aeacus. No, he kissed Aeschylus as soon as he came down and shook hands with him, and Aeschylus yielded the throne to him. But just now he meant Clydemedes said to hold himself in reserve, and if Aeschylus won, to stay quiet. If not, he said he would try about with Euripides. It is in this placing of Sophocles relatively to the disputants, even more than in the account of the contest, that Aristophanes has shown his appreciativeness. While he seems to aim merely at marking by a passing touch of the good-humoured courtesy of Sophocles, he has, with the happiness of a real critic, pointed out his place as a poet. The behaviour of Sophocles in the Frogs just answers to his place in the literary history of the age. This place is fixed chiefly by the fact that Sophocles was a poet who did not seek to be a prophet, who was before all things an artist, and who, living in the quiet essence of art, represented the mind of his day less by bringing into relief any set tendencies than by seizing in its highest unity the total spirit of the world in which he lived and the legendary world in which his fancy moved, and bringing the conflicts of his twofold world into obedience as far as possible to the first law of his own nature, harmony. The works of this instinct of harmony will be best seen first by viewing Sophocles as a poet in two broad aspects, in regard to his treatment of the heroic legends and in his relation to the social ideas of the age of Pericles. Next, by considering two of his special qualities, the quality which has been called his irony and his art of drawing character. The national religion of Greece was based upon genealogy. It carried back the mind by an unbroken ascent from living men to heroes or half-gods who had been their forebears in the flesh, and thence to gods from whom these heroes had sprung. The strength of a chain is the strength of its weakest part. Enfeeblement of belief in the heroes implied enfeeblement of belief in the gods. The decreasing vividness of faith in the heroes is the index of failing life in the Greek national religion. At the beginning of the 5th century before Christ, this belief in the heroes was real and living. The Persian wars were wars of race, the first general conflict of Hellen with barbarian, and it was natural that in such a conflict the Greek mind should turn with longing and trust toward those kindred heroes of immortal blood who long ago had borne arms for Achaea against Asia. It was told how on the day of Marathon the Athenian ranks had been cheered by the sudden presence among them of Theseus, while through the press of battle 2 other combatants had been seen to pass in more than earthly strength, the hero Achilles and he who had given his name to the field. Just before the fight at Salamis, a Greek ship was sent with offerings to the tombs of the Aeacidae and Ignia, and when the paean sounded and the fleets closed, the form of a colossal warrior was seen to move over the battle, and the Greeks knew that the greatest of the Aeacid line, the Telamonian Ajax, was with them that day, as he had been with their fathers at Troy. But from the moment when the united Greek effort against Persia was over, the old belief which had made it start up in a last glow began to die out. The causes of this decline were chiefly 3. First, the division of once united Greece into 2 camps, the Athenian and the Spartan, a division which tended to weaken all sentiments based on the idea of a common blood, and the belief in the heroes as an order was one of these sentiments. Secondly, the advance of democracy, which tended to create a jealous feeling and a sarcastic tone in regard to the claims of the old families, chief among which claims was that of kinship with the gods through the heroes. Thirdly, the birth of an historic sense. Before the Persian crisis, history had been represented among the Greeks only by local or family traditions. The wars of liberation had given to Herodotus the first genuinely historical inspiration felt by a Greek. These wars showed him that there was a corporate life, higher than that of the city, of which the story might be told, and they offered to him as a subject the drama of the collision between East and West. With him the spirit of history was born into Greece, and his work, called after the 9 Muses, was indeed the first utterance of Clio. The historical spirit was the form in which the general skepticism of the age acted on the belief in the heroic legends. For Herodotus himself, the heroes are still godlike. But for Thucydides, toward the end of the century, the genuine hero worship of Agamemnon and Pelops is no more. He criticizes their probable resources and motives as he might have discussed the conduct or the income of a contemporary. They are real to him, but they are real as men, and that, for that very reason, unreal as claimants of a half-divine character. The great cycles of heroic legends furnished in the principal subjects of Attic tragedy, three distinct methods of treating these legends appear in Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. The spirit of Aeschylus is in all things more Hellenic than Athenian. The pan-Hellenic heroism, of which in the struggle with Persia he had himself been a witness and a part, is the very inspiration of his poetry. For him, those heroes who are the common pride of the Greek race are true demigods. In his dramas, they stand as close to the gods as in the Iliad, and more than in the Iliad do they tower above men. With him, their distinctive attribute is majesty, a majesty rather titanic than in the proper Greek sense heroic. What, it may be asked, is the basis of this titanic majesty? Well, it would be easy to say that the effect is wrought partly by pomp and weight of language, partly by vagueness of outline. But the essential reason appears to be another. The central idea of Greek tragedy is the conflict between free will and fate. In Aeschylus, this conflict takes its simplest and therefore grandest form. No subtle contrivance, no complexity of purposes breaks the direct shock of the collision between man and destiny. Agamemnon, before the fury of his house, is even as Prometheus facing Zeus. In thus imaging the heroes as distinctly superhuman, and as claiming the sympathy of men rather by a rare grandeur of agony than by any closely understood affinity of experience, Aeschylus was striving to sustain a belief which had not gone out of his age, but which was dying. In his mid-career, about 10 years before his Oresteia, the so-called relics of Theseus found at Skyros were brought to Athens by Cimon, and laid in a shrine especially built for them. The distinctly religious enthusiasm then shown implies the old faith. It is hard to suppose that a like incident could have brought out like a public feeling like this, even 30 years later. Euripides, towards the end of the century, stood in nearly the same relation to his contemporaries as that of Aeschylus to his at the beginning. That is, he was in general agreement with their beliefs, but he held some things from which they were going further and further away. The national religion was now all but dead. By the side of philosophic skepticism had come up the spurious skepticism which teachers of rhetoric had made popular. The devotional need, so far as it was felt, was usually satisfied by rituals or mysteries brought in from abroad. The old creed was not often attacked, but there was a tacit understanding among able men that it was to be taken allegorically, and a dim, silently spreading sense of this had further weakened its hold upon the people. What, then, was a tragic poet to do? The drama was an act of worship. The consecrated mythology must still supply the greatest number of its subjects. Euripides solved the problem partly by realism, partly by antiquarianism. He presented the hero as a man, reflecting the mind as well as speaking the dialect of the day, and he made the legend where he could illustrate local Attic tradition. The reason why this treatment failed, so far as it failed, has not always been accurately stated. Euripides has sometimes been judged as if his poetical fault had been in bringing down half-gods to the level of men and surrounding them with mean and ludicrous troubles. Probably this notion has been strengthened by the scene in the Acarnanians. The really pointed criticisms of Aristophanes upon Euripides are to be found elsewhere, in which the needy citizen calls on Euripides and begs for some of the rags in which he has been wont to clothe his heroes, and the tragic poet tells the servant to look for the rags of Telephus between those of Thyestes and those of Ino. But the very strength of Euripides lay in a deep and tender compassion for human suffering. If he had nothing worse to his heroes than to give them rags and crutches, his power could have kept for them at least the sympathy due to the sordid miseries of men. He would only have substituted a severely human for an ideal pathos. His real fault lay in the admission of sophistic debate. A drama cannot be an artistic whole in which the powers supposed to control the issues of the action represent a given theory of moral government, while the agents are from time to time employing the resources of rhetorical logic to prove that this theory is either false or doubtful. Between these two contrasted conceptions, the austere transcendentalism of Aeschylus and the sophistic realism of Euripides, stands the conception of Sophocles. But Sophocles is far nearer to Aeschylus than to Euripides, since Sophocles and Aeschylus have this affinity that the art of both is ideal. The heroic form is in outline almost the same for Sophocles as for Aeschylus. But meanwhile there has passed over it such a change as came over the statue on which the sculptor gazed until the stone began to kindle with the glow of a responsive life, and what just now was a blank faultlessness of beauty becomes loveliness warmed by a human soul. Sophocles lived in the ancestral legends of Greece otherwise than Aeschylus lived in them. Aeschylus felt the grandeur and the terror of their broadest aspects, their interpretation of the strongest human impulses, their commentary on problems of destiny. Sophocles dwelt on their details with the intent, calm joy of artistic meditation, believing their divineness, finding in them a typical reconciliation of forces which in real life are never absolutely reconciled. A concord such as the musical instinct of his nature assured him must be the ultimate law, recognizing in them too scope for the free exercise of imagination in moral analysis, without breaking bands of reverence, for while these legends express the conflict between necessity and free will, they leave shadowy all that conflict with the man himself, which may precede the determination of the will. The heroic persons of the Sophoclean drama are at once human and ideal. They are made human by the distinct and continuous portrayal of their chief feelings, impulses, and motives. Their ideality is preserved chiefly in two ways. First, the poet avoids too minute a moral analysis, and so each character, while its main tendencies are exhibited, still remains generic, a type rather than a portrait. Secondly, and this is of higher moment, the persons of the drama are ever under the directly manifested, immediately felt control of the gods and of fate. There is indeed no collision of forces so abrupt as in Aeschylus, since the ampler unfolding of character serves to foreshow, and sometimes to delay, the catastrophe. On the other hand, there is no trace of that competition between free thought and principle of authority, which is often so jarring in the plots of Euripides. In the dramas of Sophocles, there is perfect unity of moral government and the development of human motives, while it heightens the interest of the action, serves to illustrate the power of the gods. The method by which Sophocles thus combines humanity with idealism may be seen in the cases of Ajax, of Oedipus, and of Heracles. Ajax had been deprived of the arms of Achilles by the award of the Atreidae, the goddess of Athena, whom he had angered by arrogance, had seized the opportunity of this disappointment and rage to strike him with madness. In this frenzy, he had fallen upon the flocks and herds of the Greek army on the plain of Troy, and had butchered or tortured them, thinking that he was wreaking vengeance on his enemies. When he comes to his senses, he is overpowered by a sense of his disgrace and destroys himself. The central person of this drama becomes human in the hands of Sophocles by the natural delineation of his anguish on the return to sanity. Ajax feels the new shame added to the repulse as any man of honour would feel it. At the same time, he stands above men. An ideal or heroic character is lent to him, partly by the grandeur with which two feelings, remorse and the sense that his dishonour must be effected by death, absolutely predominate over all other emotions, as over pity for Tecmessa and his son, chiefly by his terrible nearness to Athena, as one whom with her own voice she had once urged to battle, promising her aid. When face to face with her, he vaunted his independence of her and provoked her anger. Then, as the blinded victim, whom she, his pretended ally, had stung into the senselessness of slaughter. Lastly, as conscious broken-hearted sufferer of her chastisement. In the farewell of Ajax to Tecmessa and the seamen who had come with him from Salamis to Troy, a farewell really final but disguised as temporary under a sustained, though possibly unconscious irony, the human and the heroic elements are thus blended. All things the long and countless years first draw from darkness, then bury from light, and nothing is past hope. But there is confusion even for the dreadful oath, and for the stubborn will. For even I once so wondrous firm, like iron in the dipping felt my keen edge dulled by yon woman's words, and I have ruth to leave her a widow with my foes, and the boy an orphan. But I will go to the sea waters, and the meadows by the shore, that in the purging of my stains I may flee the heavy anger of the goddess. Henceforth I shall know how to yield to the gods, and learn to revere the Atreidae. They are rulers, so we must submit. Of course dread things, and things must potent bow to offers. Thus it is that the snow-strewn winters give place to fruitful summer, and thus night's weary round makes room for day, with her white horses to kindle light, and the breath of dreadful winds at last gives slumber to the groaning sea, and like the rest almighty sleep, looses whom he has bound, nor holds with an eternal grasp. And shall we not learn discretion? I chiefly, for I have newly learned that our enemy is to be hated but so far as one who will hereafter be a friend, and towards a friend I would wish so far to show aid and service as knowing that he will not always abide. For to most men the haven of friendship is false. But all this will be well. Woman, go thou within, and pray to the gods that in all fullness the desires of my heart may be fulfilled. And do ye, friends, honour my wishes even as she does, and bid Teucer, when he come, have care for me, and goodwill to you as well. For I will go whither I must pass. But do ye what I bid, and perchance, though now I suffer, ye will hear that I have found a rest. The story of Oedipus is more complex. Alternations of alarm and relief, of confidence and despair, attend the gradual unravelling of his history. The miseries which crowd upon him at the last discovery seem to exhaust the possibilities of sorrow. A character so variously tried is necessarily laid open, and Oedipus is perhaps the best known to us of the persons of Sophocles. Antigone, Electra, Philoctetes are not less human, but no such glare of lightning flashes in the depths of their natures. At the opening of the play, how perfect an embodiment of assured greatness is Oedipus the king, bending with stately tenderness to the trouble of the Theban folk. Ho, my children, latest born to Cadmus, who was of old, why bow ye to me thus beseeching knees, with the wreathed bow of the suppliant in your hands, while the city reeks with incense, rings with prayers for the health and cries of woe? I deemed it unmeet, my children, to learn of these things from the mouth of others, and am come here myself, I, whom all men call Oedipus the famous. And how thoroughly answering to this is the tone in which the priest, the leader of the suppliants, tells the trouble and faith of Thebes. A blight is on it, in the fruit-guarding blossoms of the land, in the herds among the pastures, in the barren pangs of women, and withal that fiery god, the dreadful plague has swooped on us, and ravages the town, by whom the house of Cadmus is made waste, but dark Hades rich in groans and tears. It is not that we deem thee ranked with gods, that I and these children are suppliants at thy hearth, but as deeming thee first of men, not only in life's common chances, but when men have to do with the immortals, thou who earnest the town of Cadmus, and didst rid us of the tax that we paid to the hard, strong songstress. And this, though thou knewest nothing from us that could help thee, nor hadst been schooled, no, with a god's aid, as we say and deem, didst thou uplift our life. And now, Oedipus, name glorious in all eyes, we beseech thee, all we suppliants, to find for us some succour, whether thou wottest of it by the whisper of a god, or knowest it in the power of man. Then comes the oracle, announcing that the land is thus plagued because it harbours the unknown murderer of Laius. The pity of Oedipus is quickened into the fiery zeal for discovery and atonement, and he appeals to the prophet Tiresias. Tiresias, whose soul grasps all things, the lore that may be told, and the unspeakable, the secrets of heaven, and the low things of the earth, thou feelest, though thou canst not see, what a plague doth haunt our state, from which, great prophet, we find in thee our protector and only saviour. Now, Phoebus, if perchance thou knowest it not from the messengers, sent answer to our question, that the only riddance from this pest which could come to us was if we should learn aright the slayers of Laius, and slay them, or send them into exile from our land. Do thou then grudge neither voice of birds, nor any other way of seer lore that thou hast, but save thyself and the state of and me, and take away all the taint of the dead, for in thee is our hope, and a man's noblest task is to help others by his best means and powers. Tiresias is silent. The taunts of Oedipus at last sting him into uttering his secret. Oedipus is the murderer. And thenceforth, through indignation, scorn, agonized suspense, the human passion mounts until it bursts forth in the last storm. And now the human element of the history has been worked out. Oedipus has passed from the limit of earthly anguish, and as if with his self-inflicted blindness had come clearer spiritual sight, he begins to feel a presentiment of some further particular doom. Suffer me to dwell on the hills, he asks of Creon, that there I may die. And yet thus much I know, that neither sickness nor aught else shall destroy me, for I should never have been saved on the verge of death, except from some strange ill. The second play of Sophocles, Oedipus at Colonus, has pervading it the calm of an assurance, into which this first troubled foreboding has settled down. Oedipus, already in the spirit, separate from men, has found at Colonus the destined haven of his wanderings, and only awaits the summons out of life. At last, from the darkness of the sacred cavern, the voice long waited for is heard. Oedipus, Oedipus, why do we tarry? And the eyewitness of his passing says, not the fiery bolt of the god took him away, nor the tumult of sea storm in that hour, but either a summoner from heaven, or the deep place of the dead opened to him in love, without a pang. For the man was ushered forth, not with groans, nor in sickness or pain, but beyond all mortals, wondrously. As Oedipus, first shown in the vividness of a tortured humanity, is then raised above men by keen spiritual anguish, so it is earthly passion and boldly suffering which gave a human interest to Heracles, the very son of Zeus. He stands by the altar at Mount Canaeum, doing sacrifice to his Olympian father for the taking of Oechalia. Clad in the robe with his messenger, Lycas has just brought him as the gift Deianira, the robe with which she has secretly anointed with the blood of the centaur Nessus, believing this to be a charm which shall win back to her the love of Heracles. What follows is thus told. At first, hapless one, he prayed with cheerful heart, rejoicing in this comely garb. But when the flame of sacrifice began to blaze from the holy offerings and from the resinous wood, sweat broke out upon his flesh, and the tunic clung to his sides, and at every joint, close glued as if by workman's hand, and there came a biting pain, twitching at his bones, and then the venom, as of a deadly cruel adder, began to eat him. Then it was that he cried out in the unhappy Lycus, in no wise guilty of for thy crime, asking with what thoughts he brought this robe, and he, knowing nothing, hapless man, said that he had only brought it thy gift as he was charged. Then Heracles, as he heard it, and as a piercing spasm which clutched his lungs, caught him by the foot, where the ankle hinges in the socket, and flung him at a rock washed on both sides by the sea, and Lycus has his white brain oozing through his hair, as the skull is cloven with the blood scattered therewith. But all the people lifted up a voice of anguish and of awe, since one was frenzied and the other slain, and no one dared to come before the man, for he was twitched to the ground and into the air, howling, shrieking, and the rocks rang round, the steep Locrian headlands of Euboea's capes. But when he was worn out, with ofttimes throwing himself in his misery on the ground, and often making loud lament, while he reviled his ill-starred wedlock with thee, and his marriage into the house of Aeneas, saying how he had found in the ruin of his life, then out of the flame and smoke that beset him, he lifted his distorted eye, and saw me in the great host weeping, and he looked at me and called me, Son, come here, do not flee my woe, even if thou must die with me, come, bear me out of the crowd, and set me, if thou canst, in a place where no man shall see me. If thou hast any pity, at least convey me with all speed out of his land, and let me not die on this spot. Presently Heracles himself is brought before the eyes of the spectators. In the lamentation wrung from him by his torment, two strains are clear above the rest, and each is of a strain of thoroughly human anguish. He contrasts the strength in which, through life, he has been the champion of helpless men, ofttimes on sea, and in all forests ridding them of plagues, with his own helpless misery in this hour, and he contrasts the greatness of the work to which he had seemed called with the weakness of the agent who has arrested it. Quote, "Ah, me, whose hands and shoulders have borne full many a fiery trial, too evil to tell, but never yet hath the wife of Zeus or the hated Eurystheus laid on me aught so dreadful as the woven snare of the Furies, which the daughter of Aeneas falsely fair hath fastened on my shoulders, and by which I perish. Glued to my sides, it has eaten away my flesh to the bone. It is ever with me, sucking on the channels of my breath. Already it has drained my vigorous blood, and all my body I am marred, the thrall of these unutterable bonds. Not the warrior on the battlefield, not the giants' earthborn host, nor the might of the wild beasts, nor Hellas, nor the land of the alien, nor all the lands which I have visited and purged, have done unto me thus, but a woman, a weak woman, born out of the strength of man alone has struck me down without a sword. O King Hades, receive me. Smite me, O flash of Zeus, O King, O Father, hurl thy thunderbolt upon me. Again the pest eats me. It has blazed up. It has started into fury. O hands, O shoulders and breasts and trusty arms, ye in this plight who are they who once tamed by force the haunter of Nemea, the scourge of herdsmen, the lion whom no man might approach or face, who tamed the hydra of Lerna, and the host of most monsters of double form, man, the joint or horse, with whom none might mingle, fierce, lawless, of surpassing might, tamed the Erymanthian beast, and the three-headed dog of Hades underground, an appalling foe, offspring of the dread Echidna, tamed the serpent, who guards the golden apples in the earth's utmost clime, and of other toils 10,000 I had tasted, and no man had got a trophy from my hands. But now the joints, thus wrenched from joint, with frame torn to shreds, I have been wrecked by this blind curse. I, who am named son of noblest mother, I, who was called the offspring of starry Zeus." End quote. Anon he learns that the venom which is devouring him is the poisoned blood of his old enemy, the centaur Nessus. That knowledge gives him at once the calm certainty of death. And now, in the nearness of the passage to his father, there arises triumphant over bodily torment the innate tranquil strength of his immortal origin. He sees in this last chapter of his earthly ordeal the foreordained purpose of Zeus. Quote, "It was foreshown to me by my father of old that I should die by no creature that had the breath of life, but by one who was dead and a dweller in Hades. So this monster, the centaur, even as the gods' will had been foreshown, slew me, a living man, when he was dead." End quote. He directs that he shall be carried to the top of Mount Oeta, above Trachis, sacred to Zeus, that a funeral pyre shall there be raised, and he, while yet living, laid upon it, that so the flame, which frees his spirit from the flesh, may in the same moment bear it up to Zeus. No one of the sacred places of Greece was connected with a legend of such large meaning, with one which was so much a world legend as this mountain summit overlooking the waters of the Malian Gulf. As the generation after generation came to struggle with plagues against which rose no new deliverer, weary eyes must often have turned to the height on which the first champion of men had won his late release from the steadfast malignity of fate, where, in the words of the chorus foreboding the return of Philoctetes to Trachis, the great warrior, wrapped in heavenly fire, drew near to all the gods. It is Sophocles, in the Trachinae, who has given the noblest and the most complete expression to this legend, showing Heracles first as the son of Zeus, suffering for men and sharing their pain, then, towards the end of his torments, as already godlike, in the clear knowledge of his father's will and of his own coming, change, and perfect godhead. One aspect of the poetry of Sophocles has now been noticed: the character of the treatment applied to him by those legends which supplied the chief material of Greek tragedy. It has been pointed out that the heroes of Aeschylus are essentially superhuman, that the heroes of Euripides are essentially human, and often of a low human type, that the heroes of Sophocles are at once human and superhuman. human generically by the expression of certain general human qualities, superhuman partly by the very strength in which these qualities are portrayed, partly by the direct relation of the persons with supernatural powers. It has been seen further that these three styles of handling correspond with successive phases of contemporary belief, the tendency of Greek thought in the 5th century BC having been gradually to lower the ideal stature of the ancestral demigods. But this change of feeling towards the myths is not only the change of which the account has to be taken. The spirit of dramatic poetry was influenced less directly, yet broadly, by the current of political change. At the beginning of the 5th century BC, Athens was a limited democracy. At the close of the century, it was an absolute democracy. 3 periods may be marked in this transition. The first includes the new growth of democracy at Athens, springing from the common effort against Persia, the reform of Aristides, and the reform of Pericles. Its net result was the formal maturing of the democracy by the removal of a few old limitations. The second period is one of rest. It covers those 30 years during which the recent abolition of conservative checks was compensated by the controlling power of Pericles, and there was, in name, a democracy, but in fact, government by the leading man. The third period, beginning at the death of Pericles, at last shows the mature democracy in its normal working. The platform for a leader of the people, which Pericles had first set up, remains. It is held by a series of men subservient to the people, and the result is in the sovereignty of the ecclesia. Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides represent respectively the first, second, and third of these periods. Aeschylus, whose mind was healed and heated to its highest glow by the common Greek effort against Persia, and thenceforth kept the impression of that time, was through life democratic just so far as Athens was democratic at the end of the Persian Wars. On the one hand, he shared the sense of civic equality created by common labours and perils. On the other hand, he held the old religion of Greece and Athens to the family traditions, bound up with it, and to the constitutional forms consecrated by both. His greatest trilogy, the Oresteia, marks the end of the first period just defined, and its third play, the Eumenides, is a symbol of its political creed. On the one hand, it exalts Theseus, peculiarly the hero of the democracy. On the other, it protests against the withdrawal of a moral censorship from the Areopagus. Euripides, in the last third of the century, is a democrat living under a democracy which is disappointed, the entire democracy has disappointed its theory. His constant praise of the farmer class is meaning. He likes them because they were the citizens who had least to do with the violence of the ecclesia. And the sense of his violence, the hopeless bane, as he thought it, of the democracy, which hindered him from having a thorough interest in the public affairs of the city and from drawing any vigorous or continuous life for his poetry from that source. It was natural that he should have been one of the literary men who, towards the end of the war, emigrated from Athens to Macedonia. The strain of social criticism, often rather querulous, which runs through his plays, gives them, in one respect, a tone strange to Attic tragedy. An Athenian dramatist at the festivals was a citizen addressing fellow citizens. Not only a religious, but a certain political sympathy was supposed to exist between them. Aeschylus and Sophocles, in their different ways, both make this political sympathy felt as part of their inspiration. Euripides has little or nothing of it. He shares the pride of his fellow citizens in the historical or legendary glories of the city. As for the present, he is a critic, standing apart. More thoroughly than Aeschylus in the first period, or Euripides in the third, is Sophocles, a representative poet in the second period of the century. The years from about 460 to about 430 BC have been called the Age of Pericles. The chief external characteristic of the time, so called, is plain enough. It is the age of the best Athenian culture, a moment for Greece such as the Florentine Renaissance was for Europe. The age was especially of sculpture, of architecture, and of the most perfect dramatic poetry. But is there any general intellectual characteristic, any distinctive idea which can be recognized as common to all the various efforts of that age? The distinctive idea of the Periclean age seems to have been that of Pericles himself, the desire to reconcile progress with tradition. Pericles looked forward and backward. Forward to the development of knowledge and art, backward to the past from which Athens had derived an inheritance of moral and religious law. He had the force both to make his own idea the ruling idea in all the intellectual activity of the age, and to give to his age the political rest demanded for his task of harmonizing the spiritual past and future of a people. Thucydides, a trustworthy witness for the leading thoughts, if not for the words of Pericles, make him dwell on the way in which two contrasted elements had come to be tempered in the life of Athens. After describing the intellectual tolerance, the flexibility, and gladness of Athenian social life, Pericles goes on. Thus, genial in our private intercourse, in public things we are kept from lawlessness mainly by fear, obedient to the magistrate of the time and to the laws, especially to those laws which are set for the help of the wronged, and to those unwritten laws of which the sanction is a tacit shame. It is by this twofold characteristic, on the one hand sympathy with the progressive culture, on the other hand reverence for the immemorial unwritten law, that Sophocles is the poet of the Periclean age. There are two passages which, above all others in his plays, are expressive of these two feelings. It is a chorus in the Antigone, and the other is a chorus in the Oedipus Tyrannus. One celebrates the inventiveness of man, the other insists upon his need for purity. In the Antigone, the chorus exalts the might of the gods by measuring against it those human faculties which it alone can overcome. Wondrous are many. Quote, wondrous are many, but nothing is more wonderful than man. That power which walks the whitening sea before the stormy south, making a path amid engulfing surges, and earth, the eldest of the gods, the immortal, the unwearied, doth it wear, turning the soil with the race of horses, as the ploughs go to and fro from the year to year. And the careless tribe of birds, the nations of the angry beasts, the deep sea's ocean brood, he snares in the meshes of his own woven wiles. He leads captive man, excellent in wit. He conquers by his arts the beast that walks in the wilds of the hills. He tames the horse with shaggy mane. He puts its yoke on its neck. He tames the stubborn mountain bull. And speech, and wind-swift thoughts, and all the mood that mould a state hath he taught himself, and how to flee the shafts of frost beneath the clear, unsheltering sky, and the arrows of the stormy rain. All providing is he. Unprovided he meets nothing that must come. Only from death shall he not win in deliverance. Yet from his hard sicknesses hath he devised escapes. Cunning beyond the fancies, dreams, that's that resourceful skill which brings him now to evil, anon to good. When he honours the laws of land, proudly stands his city. No city hath he who in his rashness harbours sin. Never may he shame my hearth. Never think my thoughts, who doth these things. End quote. In the Oedipus Tyrannus, the chorus is indirectly commenting on the scorn for oracles just expressed by the Locuste. Quote, mine be the lot to win a reverent purity in all words and deeds sanctioned by those laws of sublime range, brought forth in the wide clear sky, whose birth is of Olympus alone, which no brood of mortal man begat, which forgetfulness shall never lay to sleep. Strong in these is the god, and grows not old. Insolence breeds the tyrant, insolence once blindly gorged with plenty, with things which are not fit or good. When it hath scaled the crowning height, leaps on the abyss of doom, where it is served not by the service of the foot, but that rivalry which is good for the state. I pray that the god may never quell. The god ever will I hold my champion. But whoso walks haughtily in deed or word, unterrified by justice, revering not the shrines of gods, may an evil doom take him for his miserable pride, if he will not gain his gains fairly, if he will not keep himself from impieties, but must lay wanton hands on things inviolable. In such case what man can boast any more than he shall ward the arrows of anger from his life? Nay, if such deeds are honoured, what have I more to do with dance and song? No more will I go a worshipper to the awful altar at earth's centre, no more to Abi's shrine or to Olympia, if these oracles fit not the issue, so that all men shall point at them with the finger. Nay, king, if thou art rightly called Zeus all-ruling, let it not escape thee and thy deathless power. End quote. We have now looked at the second general aspect of the poetry of Sophocles. As in his treatment of the heroic legends he interprets but is above, the religious spirit of his age. So in his reconciliation of enterprise and reverence, he gives an ideal embodiment to the social spirit of the age. Aeschylus is a democratic conservative. Euripides is the critic of a democracy which he found good in theory, but practically vicious. Sophocles sets upon his work no properly political stamp, but rather the mark of a time of political rest, and of manifold intellectual activity, an activity which took its special character from the idea of an elastic development reconciled with a restraining moral tradition. As the general spirit of Sophocles is perhaps best seen in these two phases, so among the special qualities of his work there are two which may be taken as the most distinctive. His irony, to give it the name by which Bishop Thirlwall's essay has made familiar, and his delineation of character. The practical irony of drama depends on the principles that the dramatic poet stands aloof from the world which he creates. It is not for him to be an advocate or a partisan. He describes a contest of forces, and decides the issue as he conceives that it would be decided by the powers which control human life. The position of a judge in reference to two litigants, neither of whom has absolute right on his side, is analogous to the position of a dramatic poet in reference to his characters. Every dramatic poet is necessarily in some degree ironical. In speaking, then, of the dramatic irony of Sophocles, it is not meant that this quality is peculiar to him. It is only meant that in this quality he is especially noticeable and especially artistic. Irony depends on a contrast. The irony of tragedy depends mainly on a contrast between the beliefs or purposes of men and those issues to which their actions are overruled by higher powers. Sophocles has the art of making this contrast. Throughout the whole course of drama, peculiarly suggestive and forcible. In his 7 extant plays, the contrasts thus worked out have different degrees of complexity. The Trachiniae and Electra may be taken as those in which the dramatic irony is simplest. In the Trachiniae, there is a twofold contrast of a direct kind. First, between the love of Deianira for Heracles and the mortal agony into which she unwittingly throws him. Then, between the meaning of the oracle, promising rest to Heracles, as understood by him and Deianira, and its real import. In the Electra there is a peculiar and general contrast, both direct. The sister is mourning the supposed death of her brother at the very moment when he is about to enter the house as an avenger. And the situation with which he and the play ends is the exact reversal out of which it is opened. The Ajax and the 2 Oedipus plays again might be classed together in respect of dramatic irony. In each case, the suffering is inflicted by the gods. But through this, the sufferer passes to a higher state. Athena, the pretended ally of Ajax, humbles him even to death, but this death is a complete atonement, and his immortal fame as a canonized hero begins from the burial with which the drama closes. In the Oedipus Tyrannus, the primary contrast is between the seeming prosperity and the really miserable situation of the king. A secondary contrast runs through the whole process of inquiry which leads up to the final discovery. The truth is gradually evolved from those very incidents which display or even exalt the confidence of Oedipus. In the Oedipus at Colonus, this contrast is reversed. The Theban king is old, blind, poor, an outcast, a wanderer. But he has the inward sense of a strength which can no more be broken, of a vision clearer than that of the bodily eye, of a spiritual change, which has made a sorrow a possession, of approach to final rest. It is, however, in the 2 remaining plays, the Antigone and the Philoctetes, that this irony of drama takes its most subtle and most artistic form. Antigone buries Polynices against the law of the land. Creon dooms her to death, and thereby drives his own son to suicide. But the issue is not a simple conflict between state law and religious duty. It is a conflict between state law too harshly enforced and natural affection set above the laws. Creon is right in the letter and wrong in the spirit. Antigone is right in the spirit and wrong in the letter. Creon carries his point, but his victory becomes his misery. Antigone incurs death, but dies with her work done. In the Philoctetes, again, there is an antithesis of a like kind. Philoctetes is injured and noble. Odysseus is dishonest but patriotic. Odysseus wishes to capture Philoctetes in the public interest of the army at Troy. He urges on Neoptolemus that the end sacrifices the means, sanctifies the means even. Neoptolemus at first recoils, then consents, finally deserts the plot in a passion of generous pity for Philoctetes. The result is that Philoctetes is brought back to Troy, but by fair means. He eventually agrees to do that of which he has loathed the thought, and goes back to the hated enemies under circumstances which make that return the happiest event of his life. Odysseus, on the other hand, gains his end, but not by the means which he had proposed to himself. He carries Philoctetes back to Troy, but only after his stratagems have been foiled. Neoptolemus, meanwhile, true, after his first lapse to honour, conquers without a change of front. It is that same instinct of harmony which has already been seen to rule the work of Sophocles in its largest phases, which gives its motive and delicate precision to his management of dramatic irony. He works out contrasts of drama so clearly, and with such fineness, because he aims at showing how a beneficent power at last solves them, not as in Aeschylus by victory of a supernatural evil power, nor as in Euripides by abrupt intervention, but through those natural workings of human character and action over which the gods watch. The accurate delineation of human character has therefore a special importance for Sophocles. It has already been said that in the primary or heroic persons of the Sophoclean drama, human character is delineated only broadly, with a deliberate avoidance of fine shading. It is therefore in the secondary or subordinate persons of the drama that we must look for the more delicate touches of ethical portraiture. Sophocles allows and shows his psychological skill, especially in two ways. In the process by which a sensitive and generous nature passes from one phase of feeling to another, and in tracing the action upon each other of dissimilar or opposite natures. Philoctetes, first rejoiced by the arrival of the Greeks on the island, then suspicious, then reassured, then frenzied with anger, then finally conciliated. Tecmessa, agitated successfully by fear, by hope, by despair concerning Ajax. Electra, at first heroically patient in the hope that her brother will return as an avenger, then broken-hearted at the news of his death, at last filled with rapture by his sudden living presence. Deianira, by turns anxious, elated, jealous, horror-stricken. These are examples of the power with which Sophocles could trace a chapter of spiritual history. A closer examination of the character of Deianira will help to set powers in a clearer light. When the herald Lycus arrives from Trachis with the prisoners taken by Heracles at Oechalia, Iole, beautiful and dejected, at once arouses the interest of Deianira. But it is the interest of compassion merely, with a touch of condescension in its kindness. Quote, "Ah, unhappy girl, who art thou among women? Lycias, from whom is the stranger sprung?" End quote. Lycias does not know. Iole will not speak, nor has she spoken, adds the heralds, since they left Euboea. So Deianira says, quote, "Then let her be left at peace, and go into the house as it best pleases her, and not find a new pain at my hands beside her present ills. They are enough, and now let us move towards the house." End quote. Presently Deianira is told by a man of Trachis, who had heard it from Lycus himself in the marketplace, that Iole is the daughter of Eurytus, king of Oechalia, and that it was to win Iole that Heracles had stormed and sacked the town. Quote, "Ah me, unhappy," she cries, "in what a plight do I stand? What hidden bane have I taken under my roof?" End quote. Her informant and Lycus are confronted with each other. Lycus is put to confusion, and then Deianira turns to him with this appeal. Quote, "Do not, I pray thee, by Zeus, who sends forth his lightnings over the high Eden glen, do not use deceitful speech, for thou wilt tell thy news not to a base woman, nor to anyone who knows the state of men, for how it is not in their nature to take the joys of the same things. Now whosoever stands up against love as a boxer to change buffets is not wise. For love rules the gods as he will, and me also. Why should he not? Yes, and many others such as I. So that I am quite mad if I blame my husband for being taken with this malady, or blame this woman, who has had part in a thing no wise shameful, and not in any wrong to me. Come, tell the whole truth. It is a foul blight on a free man to be called a liar." End quote. Lycus confesses all, and ends with this advice. Quote, "For both your sakes, for his and for thine own as well, bear with the woman." End quote. And Deianira pretends to have adopted his counsel. "Nay," she says, "even thus am I minded to do. Believe me, I will not bring on myself a self-sought bane by waging fruitless war with the gods." End quote. But how different is the feeling with which she presently avows to the chorus of the Trachinian maidens? Quote, "Of anger against a man I have no thought, but to live with the same house with this girl, what woman could bear it?" End quote. Then she remembers the love charm given her long ago by Nessus. There is a moment of feverish hope while she is preparing and dispatching the robe for Heracles, but hardly has it dawned when an accident reveals to her that she has anointed the robe with some poison of fearful virulence. In a moment her thoughts rush forward to the worst, and her own words, in telling the story of the chorus, foreshadow the death to which she presently gives herself on hearing the tidings from Ubaya. Quote, "Life with a bad name must not be borne by her who glories to have been born not base." End quote. The second special form in which Sophocles shows his power of drawing character consists in exhibiting the action upon each other of natures broadly or at least distinctly different. He loved to display this mutual action in an interview, at which the two speakers exchange arguments. The sisters Electra and Chrysothemis, the sisters Antigone and Ismene, hold conversations of this kind. It might be objected that in these cases the influence can scarcely be called mutual, and that while Electra makes Chrysothemis angry and Antigone makes Ismene feel ashamed, Chrysothemis produces no impression upon Electra nor Ismene upon Antigone. But it should be observed that in each case the weak sister had this important influence upon the strong sister. She made her feel alone. The selfishness of Chrysothemis isolates Electra in the task of avenging their father, as the feminine timidity of Ismene isolates Antigone in the task of burying their brother. In each case, the heroine agitates the less courageous sister, and on the other hand, the defection of a natural ally braces the heroine. But the finest examples of such juxtaposition are to be found in the Philoctetes, a tragedy for artistic finish has often and perhaps justly been ranked as its author's masterpiece, and in which the absence of much incident permitted or exacted the utmost exercise of skill in delineating character. From many good passages in the play, one may be chosen as a specimen: the opening scene between Odysseus and Neoptolemus. Odysseus, holding the public interest of the army at Troy, justifies recourse to fraud, proposes to take Philoctetes by a stratagem. Neoptolemus, a young and generous man, is at first shocked, but Odysseus succeeds in making ambition conquer the sense of honor. The dialogue itself alone can give an idea to the fineness with which this is managed. Neoptolemus, what wouldst thou? Odysseus. The mind of Philoctetes must be snared by thee with a well-told tale. When he asks thee of who and whence thou art, say, the son of Achilles. That must not be garbled. But thou art homeward bound, having quitted the Greek armada and conceived for them a deadly hatred. The thing to be plotted is just this: how thou mayest compass to steal the unconquerable arms. I well know, my son, that by nature thou art unapt to utter or to frame such wiles. Yet victory, we know, is a sweet prize to win. Take heart. Our honesty shall be proved another time. But now lend thyself to me for one little roguish day, and then, for all the rest of thy days, be called the most virtuous of men. Neoptolemus. Son of Laertes, whatever counsels pain in my ear, to the same I abhor to lend my hand. It is not in my nature to compass aught by knavery, neither in mine nor, as they say, in my father's. I am ready to take the man by force, not by fraud. With the use of only one foot, he will never worst of all of us in open fight. And yet, having been sent to aid thee, I am loath to be called traitor. But I wish, Prince, to miss my mark by doing right, rather than to win by baseness. Odysseus. Son of a gallant sire, time was when I, too, in my youth, had a slow tongue and an active hand. But now, when I come at it with proof, I see that words, not deeds, always come to the front with men. Neoptolemus. In short, what dost thou bid me? Do but a lie. And here ensues the dialogue, Neoptolemus and Odysseus, each giving one line before the other answers. Odysseus. I bid thee take Philoctetes by guile. And why by guile? And more than persuasion. He will never be persuaded, and by force thou art not likely to take him. Hath he a strength so defiant and dreadful? Arrows Zeus, inevitable and winging death. Neoptolemus. One cannot dare then even go near him? Odysseus. No, unless thou snare him, as I bid, Neoptolemus. So thou thinkest it is no shame to lie? Odysseus. None, if the lie is fraught with the health. Neoptolemus. And how shall a man have the face to utter it? Odysseus. When thou dost aught for gain, it is unmeet to shrink. Neoptolemus. And what gain for me is his coming to Troy? Odysseus. Troy can be taken by these arrows alone. Neoptolemus. Then I am not, as he said, to be the captor? Odysseus. No, not thou apart from these, nor these from thee. Neoptolemus. It seems then thy must be one, if so it stands. Odysseus. I tell thee by this deed thou shalt gain 2 gifts. Neoptolemus. What are they? If I knew, I would not shrink. Odysseus. Thou wilt be known as wise and brave. Neoptolemus. Enough, I'll do it. Put away all shame. End quote. I have attempted to show that what is distinctive of the genius of Sophocles is a 4-fold manifestation. In his blending of a divine with a human character in the heroes, in his expression of the effort to reconcile progress with tradition, in his dramatic irony, that is, in the precision with which he brings out contrasts, especially between the purposes of men and of the gods, in order that the final solution may be more impressive. Lastly, in his portrayal of character, not in a series of situations, but continuously through chapters of spiritual history. It has been seen that the instinct which rules his work under each of these aspects is what may be called, in the larger sense, the instinct of harmony. His imagination has a tranquil mastery of the 2-fold realm of tragedy, the natural and supernatural, and tempers the conflicting elements of each or both with a sure sense of fitness and just proportion. It is for this reason, because of all the Greek poets, he is the most perfectly an artist, that his poetry has a closer significance than any other for that form of plastic art which stands nearest to drama. It is the best interpreter of those pieces of Greek sculpture, such as the groups of Niobe and Laocoon, which express a moment of conflict between human and superhuman force. It has been said that for the Greeks, beauty was the index on the balance of expression. That is a central control governing the equipoise between terror and pity. The terror, inspired by Niobe and by Laocoon, accusing with the upturned eyes of their destroying power. The pity, inspired by the children, clinging to the shelter which cannot protect them. These are harmonized by the beauty, at once terrible and tender, of the whole. Just such is the harmony between the human and the superhuman elements in the agony of Oedipus and of Heracles. Again, it is chiefly because Sophocles had supremely the most Greek of instincts, the instincts of just proportion, that his mind was so perfectly attempered to the genius of Greek polytheism, a religion of which the piety was a reverent sense of beauty and of measure. He lived just when this religion had shed upon its great strength of the intellectual light, which could bear without fading. He is perhaps the highest type of its votary, the man for whom, more than any other who could be named, the old national religion of Greece was a self-sufficing, thoughtful, and ennobling faith. Sophocles was indeed the perfect Greek ideal of a man who loved the gods and was loved by them. One, the work of whose life was their service under their direct inspiration, to whom they gave victory not followed by insolence, long years, and opportuneness of death, and whom the most imaginative of satirists could not imagine, even among the boundless rivalries of the dead, less good-humoured than he had been upon the earth.